All right. Well, welcome all to back to after a long hiatus, our Zoom laboratory gathering that we're trying to do now once a month, just an opportunity for us to gather together, share some best practices, some expertise, some other anything we need to kind of help us get through things. I'll give you a little bit of an update about what I'm thinking about for this group, and then a little bit about the Zoom thing, and then I want to share some thoughts that I've had just very briefly to start us off for some conversation. So first, I'm glad to see a lot of folks. We won't go through introductions or anything today, but we do ask that when you do respond later on, that you simply just always kind of say your name. You want to share your pronouns and where you're located and kind of your ministry. So just really quick so folks can get to know who you are. So welcome if you are new to this group. We've been doing this off and on since March. So we are pressing on almost a year. It's hard to believe. I just, um, the congregation I'm serving, First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, I've now led more worship online than in person because I've only been here for a year and a half, and have lived more in shelter in place in the manse, our parsonage, the house for the church, than not. So it's an interesting time. I also want to give you a little bit of update. I did take a little bit of a break. Some of you know that we've had multiple COVID deaths in our family, and so really kind of just had to practice what I preach with people, and really took some time to just be. So appreciate everybody. For those of you who didn't know, that's kind of why there was a little bit of a lull on top of everything else that's going on in the world. Um, and yeah, so we're going to come back. We're going to go monthly and be a little more focused and try to pick topics for each month. Maybe invite some guests in, and so change the format a little bit. Before I would share slides from our congregation, but we're not going to do that anymore. And then while this group will kind of launch out of our Zoom Faith Laboratory on Facebook. So again, this is recording, and I do post it on my YouTube channel. And we encourage everybody to just interact in the chat. If you have questions, there's a ton of expertise that sits in this space. Everyone from kind of practical, just like how little questions that you might have, please feel free to ask those. And then there are folks who are like super nerdy, dorky, have got into everything, and that is awesome as well. So you want to take advantage of here as well as in the Zoom Facebook group. So what I'd like to do today is take about 10 minutes or so and spark our conversations. I'd love to know what folks are thinking about next, what folks are thinking about in terms of how you are going to proceed as we collectively see some light at the end of the tunnel in some form. Who knows where it's different everywhere. Some churches I know have already begun to gather again. Others are still not. We as a congregation, we're targeting September, the second weekend in September, as our kind of official going back time. And if you all have tracked with First Pres Palo Alto, we've always given ourselves a very long runway just so we didn't have to have conversations every month about what was happening. So that's kind of our soft target is homecoming Sunday in September. So we're taking now some time to really think about what is next. So that's kind of our focus for today, but we'll have plenty of time to talk about everything else. I'm going to share my screen with you now, and I want to walk you through some stuff that I'm going to post online pretty soon. That's going to be free for everybody. But some of the presentations I've been giving with presbyteries, for those not Presbyterian, kind of our judicatories of congregations around options for the future. And the reason is because I think there's been a lot of energy around hybrid, not a lot of thought about what does that actually mean and what does it look like, and do we have the capacity to do that? I love the idea of doing the hybrid worship and gatherings and all that, but I also know that oftentimes we jump into things without thinking through fully, and just leads to burnout and disappointment and all those kind of things. So I'm trying to help communities think through some of that as we're doing that ourselves. So I'm going to take you through the initial portion of the stuff, and I want to get some feedback, but also just as a way for us to think about what you might be thinking in terms of your own space. So I'm going to go ahead and share. So I'm doing this kind of conversation with multiple bodies around what's this post-pandemic thing looking like, and discerning your options for your communal life together. This is just one section, so there's a lot before and after, but these are the way that I'm presenting some of the options for folks to begin to hold on to and think through. The first is this idea that to realize that we're being forced into this now, and what happens when we're no longer forced into it. That where is the desire and the inertia? Where is it really in our congregations? I think we've when many of us would have loved to have gotten to this space organically, but since we were all kind of forced into this, like, what are we going to do now? And if we don't think about it, I think the inertia back to what we used to do, especially in worship spaces, is going to be pretty strong. If you haven't already been feeling it, yourselves already. So I talk a little bit about that, but I want to share my assumptions before I go too far. And so these are the assumptions that I make, that I'm really talking about worship gatherings, because I think congregations, meetings, other gatherings are now just going to be changed forever. I think the option of saying, hey, can we just meet on Zoom? Once we have other options of meeting, the Zoom fatigue will not be as strong. But so I think the way that our things other than how we worship or gather, our faith communities gather, those are going to be changed forever. So I'm not really talking about that. I'm really talking mostly about how most of our communities are centered on one single event and worship, so that it's still, obviously church is more than worship, but worship is still central to most of our congregations and communities. So I'm operating off of that assumption. So there could be lots of conversation about other things, but I'm really focusing on worship, was where a lot of the energy is for people. And then I'm very strong with this as a church planter earlier in my time, that worship is not a competition, that I think we get into this a lot. And the more insecure we are as leadership, the more I think we tend to lean into this around numbers and what is success and all of the things that that we've always dealt with as communities, but now I think it's starting to come back. We've seen that quite a bit, is how do we just rejoice in how folks are finding their space and what they're doing. But at the same time, that we're given this great gift of actually having some numbers. And so how we engage those numbers and evaluate engagement is important. So I do appreciate numbers, but it is not a competition for us. And that there's a spectrum of options. That context matters, and all of us as leadership, we must, we have to translate and assess for our particular spaces. So I'm going to lay out 5 options, but we just know that all of us have to kind of figure out where do these fit within our communities. And then lastly, my focus around hybrid worship, it just requires a lot more energy and resources than I think most congregations have. And so how do we think about other ways of doing this, or being really realistic about investing in the communities and the ways in which we're going to worship? So let me just lay out the 5 options that I see them at this point. There's in-person only, like you're going to go back to in-person, that there's Zoom or remote only, that you have some sort of streaming, some sort of, you might go to 2 services, in person and hybrid. In person and Zoom only, and then you could do hybrid. Let me talk about those 5 real quick, and then I would love to see how this is where you all are. The first is in person only, right? What most of us were doing before pandemic, you're only meeting in a geographic location. There's no technology out any more than you used to do. And some of the options are obviously we get to sing again. We might get to sing again. We get to see each other face to face. But the negative of the why not to do this is all these connections that many communities have made. You'll lose those. And so making sure that we don't lose those. So that's the other option. The remote only is, you worship just on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever you're using. And it's remote, like most of us have been doing now. interactive. It's in the moment. You might pre-record as well, but it's right. But you're going to just stay with just a remote service. Why? Yes. Like if you, like our church has seen multi-generations are worshiping together again. You're connecting with people again across boundaries and borders. But why not? Well, I'm not sure. Most folks want to actually see each other face to face if they've been part of the community before pandemic. So there's the first two. The next one would be to go to two completely separate services, right? You just decide we're just going to do these two services, and we're going to do both of them well, and we already know how to do them both. So we could just go into that. The biggest downside are things that the pushback would be, but I really want to get to know everyone. And so I think that would be the downside. I just lost my screen here. Okay. So then the next one would be streaming. That it's sanctuary centered, where remote participants watch others worship, and there's some online interaction. So those of you that have been streaming, the level of interaction that you're able to do now. You might be able to increase that, but essentially it's focused on one geographic location. The yes factor is lots of people are watching. I get to watch worship whenever I want. I get, there's kind of an observation kind of space that you can be in. And it's pretty anonymous and easy and accessible. Why not? The interaction piece, whether it's in person or in Zoom, that can go down. Again, there's a spectrum of things. And then finally, it's the hybrid version, right? You're in person or remote. How I'm defining hybrid, and there's a spectrum to this, is that you essentially have the same experience whether you're on site or you're on your couch. That you're still kind of saying this is a space that you would want to, you're all gathered around at this point. The yeses would be, yes, we're still around the same table. Folks are sitting down however and wherever they choose. Why not? Just a ton of work. Those of us who have been doing this now, and all of us really can imagine how much more work this might be. And so we really wanted to take this seriously. So those are the 5 options that I'm looking at with communities and with the congregation I'm serving as well. Just to give you a little preview, again, I'm going to share all of this information. It's going to be free and all that, and probably this week sometime. I do ask people to think about some questions around congregational desire and kind of inertia back to what we used to do. What are the opportunities and gains that you could have? What are the obstacles and losses that might happen? What's your capacity? And that's technological, energy, stat, all those kinds of things. What kind of technical resources are you going to need? Are you willing to invest in it? And ultimately, what's the most faithful decision for the future of your community? Included in this is a quiz, a survey that I'm giving that I've created and have worked through a few times. I'm using it with the congregation I'm serving. It's not short, but it gives a good span, and it has questions like this. What's the level of desire of the congregation? So you can have people go through and say, well, what do you think we want to do? You can see from this first one, this is just our worship team. So this is about 15 people. In person, we think the congregation, the desire is pretty high to go back to in person only. Zoom, pretty low to do that only. Streaming, it starts to even out as you get further down in the responses. I'll just share a few of the questions. Which option provides the best opportunity to engage and connect with new people? That interesting. So number 1 is the highest. That hybrid and 2 services are pretty high. We had a very negative response. It was very interesting to streaming. Multiple of our folks were not up for streaming. But that's one of the kinds of questions I'm going to ask. Capacity questions. What option would require the most technical training, capacity building? And clearly, like in person, it doesn't take much at all. Everybody realized that hybrid is going to take the most. And then finally, which I thought was really interesting for our community, is it was pretty across the board even, but we've done this with 2 separate groups in our church already. And both of them have come out with the most faithful response, though, is hybrid, which I thought was, even despite all of the difficulties, yearnings, desires, capacity building that would need to happen. The two small groups that we've used this so far, they've both chosen hybrid. And so I'm thinking we're leaning towards something like that. All right, so let's keep. There's much more that goes on in this presentation. I talk about ways to engage so that you have some successful pieces around that. Anyway, so I'm going to stop sharing now, and would love to just open this up. Responses, but also kind of where you all are thinking, and what you are, where you are in your congregations right now. Remember to introduce yourself, use your pronouns, share pronouns, and kind of where you're serving, and then just share with the group. And there's no, just go ahead and unmute yourself and go, and we'll just assume we can all. I think we're just barely over one screen, so go for it.
MB, I'm in Northwest Ohio and pastor 2 small churches, and we're currently online with Zoom, and will be until our numbers are way different, which could be 2 weeks from now or it could be in the summer, but it's based on how the numbers fluctuate. And we did hybrid worship pretty successfully, starting in we started in July. We weren't really successful until August. So it took us a good month to sort of figure it out. But being in a smaller building probably facilitated that in both places. I think in a larger building it might be more difficult because, they can see one big TV from the front. So it wasn't necessary to do a lot of other things. I think that for where we are, and especially as the potential for multiple churches to end up together, we may do one Zoom only service that serves a lot of different constituencies, different churches, and then do a hybrid service that will look different in each place. Because like in my tiniest church, I can just take my iPhone and be on Zoom on my data, because there is no internet in that church. And, and I can just do that with very little difficulty there. It's not high quality. But it's what they can do. And then I can do a lot more in the larger church. So I think there are ways that we can adapt this, but I don't think we'll ever not do hybrid. So
Great, thank you.
I do think we could do just Zoom as an option, but I don't think we'll ever not offer hybrid when we're in person.
Right, thank you. And if anybody, MB brings up a couple things. Well, first, so MB is great. If you ever need to connect with somebody who's doing yoked congregations, small churches, especially kind of small rural congregations, MB is a good resource to go. I'm just sending people to you, MB, but has been wonderful about thinking through that. So one thing I want to pick up from MB that I think is important to know, I just did this with the Synod of Mid-America, which is the Presbyterians kind of, I think, Missouri, Kansas area. And one of the things we talked about was don't be fancier than you really are. And that you really need to, you don't want to lie to people to pretend that you're like this super fancy get up and you got all this stuff. And then people show up, and if they happen to see you in person, they're like, wait a minute, this doesn't click. And so there isn't really a need to have all the gadgets and everything and have it be so slick that it's kind of like your website. When I do website conversations, like your website shouldn't be aspirational. It should be true to who you are, so that when people see it and then they show up, you didn't lie to them. And I think in the same way, how you do hybrid and your technology should also somewhat mirror. You should be a little bit ahead, but in some ways it should mirror who your community actually is. And I think that's the charming part about our congregations is, being truly who we are. So the fact that MB is able to do hybrid using what they have and what they're have access to, I think is right on for our communities. All right, other people, where are you at? Go ahead and just unmute and share.
So I'm Sally Newhall. I'm in Nashua, New Hampshire. And we've been doing live Zoom services, not streaming. And we're in the process of talking about going to hybrid. sessions made it clear that they always want to have Zoom available from now on, but we're realizing that just a lot of thought has got to go into how we're going to do that. And it means, for me, an entirely different way of preparing, because the way I'm preparing for Zoom, if I'm actually in the pulpit or in the front of the sanctuary, I'm not going to have any control anymore. I have to give up control. I'm having trouble with this. Anyway, and so in terms of snow, it's not here yet, but I hear it's coming.
Thank you. I've seen folks, those of you that serve in snowy places, I've seen a lot of folks talking about it. Like snow days now, almost like disappointment is like you used to be able to just cancel worship and you wouldn't have to do it. And now they're like, oh, now everybody knows how to get on Zoom. I'm still gonna have to do it. Thank you, Sally. That's very helpful. All right, other folks, where are you at?
I'm Alan Brame. I'm in a bedroom community of Lincoln, Nebraska. We still have 6 inches from the 15-inch snow we got last week. So yeah, I've been thinking about Zoom on snow days. Our congregation is really oriented towards in-person fellowship and being together. And so there is definitely an impetus here toward moving in that direction as our ultimate goal, that we will hopefully all be back together in the sanctuary. We have been doing Zoom since last March, and I would say, you know, we're sort of a local congregation. We haven't really attracted a lot of folks from other regions of the country. Our plans going forward are we're actually going to have a soft start for an in-person worship probably March 21st in preparation for Easter. And we'll be whoever's in the sanctuary will be in the sanctuary, and we'll be live streaming because we're still in the, you know, our COVID rates have gone down, but we're still in the process of the vaccine rollout like everybody is. And there are plenty of folks in our congregation who have said we won't be in the sanctuary until we get a vaccine. But our end result goal is that we will be in person together, and we will always do a live stream. In Nebraska, we have a Nebraska Presbyterian Foundation that gives generous grants, and so we have some funds that we're going to put toward a full-on, you know, 3-camera live stream setup that we can run through one controller that's pretty easy to operate. And so we've applied for a grant for that and hope to get that in April, and we'll have that system installed at some point. In the meanwhile, we're using a Mevo to live stream our service. We were going to live stream to YouTube, but we found out yesterday when we came back together to try to figure out how to use the Mevo that YouTube has, Google in its infinite wisdom has decided that only those with over 1,000 subscribers can live stream on YouTube now. So that's kind of where we are.
Oh, they bumped it up to 1,000?
Yeah, we tried to stream it to YouTube yesterday, and it says YouTube has now, you know, restricted live stream to only those subscribers with 1,000 or more, you know, only those accounts with 1,000 or more subscribers. Yeah, we were shocked. So I guess we're going to stream.
Had you been doing it before? Because it used to be 100.
Well, we had done it. We had done it with our tests. You know, we had been doing tests because we were going to live stream when we got back together in worship, and we had planned on getting back together on the first Sunday of Advent. But then our cases went through the roof, and we have a safety plan that is coordinated with the risk dial in our county. And so we're currently in the setting where we can have in-person worship, but with lots of safeguards. But yeah, great. I mean, so we had done test runs on YouTube before, and then we got back together yesterday to try it again, and it blocked us. Oh
no.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people are operating on the 100 one because everybody's trying to get their subscriptions up to 100 so you can live stream. We'll have to check that out. I hope you're wrong, because I'm just gonna. Gosh,
we were trying. We were trying, and it may be because of the Mevo. It may be that YouTube is blocking the Mevo. That may be what it's doing. I don't know.
All right. We'll do some research on that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. Cool. And I think this is a great example, right? Every place, I think what happens in churches and church cultures, we start to build up like one thing is the end all and be all of how we're supposed to do something. And I think that had started to be this hybrid thing that you gotta like do hybrid. That's the future. And I think every community is going to have to figure out how do you do which one well. And I think, if streaming, doing it really well is awesome, especially if it fits in the community and how you want to interact and all those kind of things. So thank you, Alan, for sharing. All right, who's next?
Bruce,
go ahead.
I forgot to mention one other component, and that is that until we get to the place where we have sort of a widespread vaccine and people feel safe coming back to worship, I'm also going to do a brief Zoom gathering after worship for whoever wants to gather, because we felt like, again, being together is important enough for our congregation. We felt like the live stream only, like folks who are staying home and live streaming, that wouldn't really scratch their itch, in terms of worshiping. So we're going to do a Zoom thing as well, just a brief gathering.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Eric, for pulling something up. There you go. So Eric's put some stuff in the chat room there for folks. So there's something. So Al, you may want to check that part out. Thank you, Eric. All right. Others, who else? Where are you folks thinking about? Where are you headed? What's going on? Just unmute and share. Introduce yourself. And
I will share. We're a small congregation in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We've been having conversations about the future of the church prior to, we were ready to have those conversations before this happened. So this has made it easier to have those conversations. We're currently all Zoom, except that I record it and then do an audio to sermon by phone. And that has met a need for those people who don't have unlimited long distance calling access. We are a small church that, we don't do things more than we can. We added a single large screen to our sanctuary 6 months before this happened. And we're beginning to use that. There are people who are talking about wanting to continue Zoom so that there's that ability. There are some people that have been able to join us, shut-ins and so forth, that are with us every Sunday now, who haven't been able to worship in the sanctuary for 2 or 3 years, or some of them even more. So we want to retain that. I really appreciate some of the things people have brought up. One of our biggest limitations is our internet speed. We're on a really tight budget, and currently we have a wired system that is 8 meg. What am I thinking? What's the measurement? Megabytes per second? Mm-hmm. It's really slow. So, but the idea
did you say 8? Did you say 8?
I said 8.
Okay.
I said 8. Yeah. So, so either we have to wire that to the sanctuary, we have to bump it up. Okay. Or maybe, the idea of using my data plan. We're looking at just some really basic kinds of fixes. I know that there's a device that you can attach to the ceiling that allows you to position your cell phone wherever in the sanctuary you want to. So that might be an option for us to do it on a really cheap basis, small basis, while we're figuring out where the church goes in the next 2 or 3 years.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you, Judy. Thank you. And what's your role there?
I'm the pastor, and I'm the whole tech department.
Yep. And like many people are, you pastor, tech, you got the whole thing. That's great. There are lots of great options to be able to improve your internet if you're not, because it doesn't sound like you're plugged in at this point, that you're not hardwired in. Yeah. So we have a church here in California. So despite what you might think about California, like I have horrible internet where I am. It's not 8. I will say we're a little higher than 8, but because I'm in the middle of Silicon Valley, because I'm in the burbs of Silicon Valley, we don't actually have great internet because we're not dense enough to get all the fancy internet. And so when I was in San Francisco, we had much faster. But we have a church here in San Jose Presbytery that's out, and they were asking me how to do this. I'm like, just go buy a 200-foot cable and run it out to where you are every Sunday. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, just plug it in and then unplug it. And that has helped a great deal. So there are lots of ways. The other thing I would say, Judy, is, and I don't know about other judicatories, other denominations, I am hearing about a lot of money that's being pushed through denominations to help congregations, and they're basically just giving it away. I mean, you can just say, hey, we want to put in a Mevo, we want to put in this camera, we need to install something else. I mean, whatever it is, but I would check with your judicatories. I don't know. I know most of our presbyteries are offering something, and I don't know about other denominations, but I have heard it from some of the Episcopal dioceses and conferences. UCC conferences are doing as well. So fine. Thank you, Judy. All right. Who's next? Who wants to share? What are you all up to?
Bruce,
Yep.
Marty, Susie from Savannah, Georgia, she, her, hers. We have gone back and forth between hybrid since probably October. We started to do some hybrid. We put a screen that we used for our children's movie theater in the sanctuary so that we could project the Zoom folks to the folks that are in person. We swivel the camcorder so that the folks that are on Zoom can see the few folks that do want to come in person. We get on average about 80 to 90 people on a worship. So probably 10 to 15 are live watching on Facebook. We have at least 45 devices on Zoom. And then we have about 17 folks in person, plus the 4 of us that actually, run the worship service and try to get all those wiggly parts taken care of. I think the biggest thing has been the intentionality on language. I sometimes because thankfully for this group over this course of this year, thinking of how we're portraying what we're saying from the podium, how is that being received on Zoom or how is that being received on Facebook? And I often cringe. And then afterwards I'll say, hey, maybe you want to rethink, because that may make people feel, I just keep planting those seeds. So I think that's been the biggest hurdle for us. And we've taken it really slow as far as equipment. We have run a long cord from a building that was hardwired for internet. We've run an Ethernet cable into the sanctuary. And so we did that for the first couple months. And now we have a box in there that we had professionally put in. But yeah, just little pieces at a time to just, get to where we need to be.
Great. Thank you. That's awesome. Yes. I think language is a huge part. Later in the presentation that I just shared with you, I talk about some of the things we're going to do. So I will preach from home twice a month. So that I'm not even going to be in the space twice a month, and then we'll have leaders, because we're going to go for like real hybrid so that it's not where everybody's in the space and then come on in and we'll figure out how to connect to you. Like there will always be either the liturgist or me, or whoever's preaching and the pastor that day. One of us will always be remote. And so there's always going to be a reminder. And I'm actually going to, our chancel area, I'll have my laptop there as I'm leading worship. And so that there's physical reminders that we're not in the same space, not in the same physical space, but we're in the same space. So thank you, Marty, for bringing that. And then the other part of language is so important as you're thinking about, if you're going to do the hybrid, especially to think about how you're talking about space and language. We had our first person just asked to join the church who lives in another state. And so trying to figure out how you actually live this hybrid world in our congregations will be an interesting thing, but language is huge. So thanks for bringing that up, Marty. All right, other thoughts, questions? Where are you all headed?
I'm Tijuana. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am with Metropolitan Community Church here in Topeka, Kansas. We're a small congregation, completely on Zoom right now. Our music team goes into the sanctuary. They actually record music and we play the recording during the worship service. And I want to say I appreciate this conversation because we have just actually stopped talking about what's next, what's in the future. There's so much like dealing with the road right in front of us, completely not even thinking about it. And so I'm just thinking we definitely have to really be realistic about our limitations. We have a lot of people who are like, yeah, this is great, let's have that. And I, pastor, tech person, worship, like I'm doing all of it, and we don't have the capacity to add a whole lot of stuff. And people have talked about making sure we keep Zoom when we are back in person to have some sort of hybrid thing. They don't want it. They just want to know that it's out there and available in case the hypothetical phantom wants to join us. So I just wanted to say that I appreciate what all of you are sharing. I'm taking lots of notes and it's making me think and reminding me that, at some point we are going to have to figure out what our transition is going to be and what we're transitioning to.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tumani. Great to see you. Awesome. All right. Other folks, where are you at? What are you all thinking about? Or if you have questions for the group, you can also ask questions if you have anything that you want to throw out to the group. Go for it, Mike.
I'll talk. We've been doing hybrid officially since the beginning of November. And it wasn't a really hard transition because we've been hosting from the sanctuary for virtually all this time. So, and fortunately we have 2 screens in the front of the sanctuary. And we also project in the back without a screen on the wall. And we can choose what feed goes to those. So what we're doing is we have our PowerPoint with everything that goes to one screen. We have another screen that's dedicated to the Zoom feed. So we kind of have all those, I think that, and I don't see that changing for us probably down the road. We have about 25 who, worship in person. One thing that came up that I think I continue to lean into, and I think people don't realize that they'll ask, well, is it okay if we have a liturgist from, who Zooms from home? I was like, it's not only okay, it's desirable. Please recruit those Zoomers or liturgists from home because it's not a problem. It's a feature.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And so, Mike, can you tell us where you are, real quick?
In Newport, Oregon, so on the Central Oregon coast.
Great. And then, so you must have had some of this stuff beforehand. You must have already had screens and all that, or is this stuff you all have done?
Right. The
recently?
Screens were there already when we did a sanctuary expansion in 2006. We added permanent screens up in front, and that ability, I think the ability to have, which we didn't use much, but the ability to connect a laptop to in and put that on whichever screen we wanted. We've had that, all along. We're actually not using we've not made the connection from our sound system directly into Zoom.
Oh,
so really doing that kind of separately, which means that we have to do some mic control, obviously.
Yep.
And it's helped a lot since we have 2 people, 1 person to run PowerPoint and 1 to run Zoom.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I think the sound piece for folks, that's going to be an ongoing piece. If you were not here for the conversation we had with Heather Lynn and Jason months ago, that was actually really helpful. That that's on my YouTube channel as well. That's a great conversation because Heather Lynn and Jason have figured out a fairly inexpensive way that most churches would be able to do to plug right into your system so that you can have some of that control and your music just sounds so good. We have Heather Lynn come and lead with us, and it sounds like she's right in the room with everybody. It doesn't help with synced singing, so it's not that good, but it does help with the sound, which is really good. All right, other folks, go ahead, and if you have questions you want to share, or other things. Well, there's a question in the chat about what other parts of church life you're thinking about if you're considering an option that isn't strictly in person. I don't want to talk too much about it, but this is so. I will say, if you're going to do it's like churches that you walk in and worship is a particular way and feels a particular vibe, but then you step one step deeper into the culture and it's not that. And there's some disingenuity between this worship experience and then you get into the church and it's all of a sudden not the same and almost more restrictive and all that. What we're going to try to do, and what we've been pushing our community to do, is if we're going to be hybrid in our worship experience, then we have to do that throughout the life of our congregation. That has to feel like if people are going to engage with us in a hybrid experience in worship, and if that's one of the doors through which they walk into our community, then when we open those next spaces up or invite them into those next spaces, they have to be the same. Like, it can't just be, oh, well, you came in and we had this great hybrid experience, but you have to be here in person in order for you to serve on XXX. Like, so we've actually now told our nominating committee that our next round of elders, kind of our leadership body, should have remote people on it. So our session has decided that we're not meeting in person anymore. So it's great. Our session meetings are less than 2 hours. People roll up to wherever they're going to roll up and we're done, right? I mean, it's just no longer this 3-hour experience. We're driving, getting there. And so we've actually started putting remote folks on our committees and ministry teams. So and that was super intentional. Our worship team, who's helping us make these decisions, we have remote people helping us make these decisions. So it's kind of set up, right? That they're not going to decide, well, we should go back to in-person only. So these are folks who they are going to go into this knowing that these are people who've been engaged and are now getting involved with our congregation, and they're never going to live in the city that we exist in. So I think it's really important that if you're going to do this, that there will be a level at which you'll have to tell people they can't get involved if you don't have an online component that runs through the culture of your congregation. And that's hard to do. I mean, that's not an easy, one of the exciting things that I'm in some conversations with, I think the person from your church, right, Katie, is a youth person, right? We're looking at what does it look like to have a possible youth group, something that's no longer required you to be in the same space. You live that out locally, but your youth group is now all across the country, and we're talking, have conversations about focused on justice and advocacy and activism for youth from small churches. Like, just opens up all these possibilities if the congregation can kind of be open to it. So yeah. So there you go. That's kind of the stuff that we're doing. Or others, what else are you doing besides kind of language and things, physical things in your worshiping space? But are other people, what are you doing to kind of keep this cultural kind of shift going? Has anybody been thinking about that or living some stuff out? Oh, I know you have.
So Bruce, we had a Christian Ed meeting Sunday at Wilmington Island. That's in Savannah, Georgia. And we were talking about, how do we interact now with the small children we've been sending home, at home activities. And then when we gather together for worship in person, once a month, we have an in-person outdoor event for the kids. So, they can experience that. So as we were talking about just different ways to get the country or our community to be more, communal. And so that led to a lot of different discussions on just this line, how do we, have everyone involved, whether they're comfortable coming into the sanctuary, whether they've had their shots or not, because in realistic views, people are not going to be 100% comfortable with being fully in person, I think, for at least a year, if not longer.
Yeah.
Because there's folks all over the board on whether they want to get vaccinated, whether they trust the vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, this is not something, as we should have already learned, that is going to go away instantaneously.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Thank you, Marty, for bringing that up. I think that everybody, like even us, like we're gonna flip some switch the second Sunday of September. Well, that's really not like there's no switch, right? They've been saying that forever. But I think that how you figure out that runway and that, like, what is it going to look like and all that, I think is actually really important. Thank you, Marty. I will say one of the things that we've talked about is hybrid doesn't mean that everything is hybrid. Like, it just means that overall you're able to say, here are the things we offer as a community. Like, we'll have one group that they're always going to meet in person in Palo Alto. I mean, that's what they do. And then, but I may have other groups that I'm like, well, this group always meets online, right? So just this idea that everything has to be this mix is also not like, it's just, what do you do for your children and youth that are right in the area? What do you do if you're going to do a broad spectrum? How do you now get your college age folks, those that are away, to engage back together? I mean, that's one of the things that we're starting to sneak into now that those are the students that are in college or college age in our community. We're trying to bring them back together, and it's much easier now than to try to have a bunch of college students come together. But our community just sent out care packages with handwritten notes. So, I mean, those kinds of things, right? And then we're going to invite them into kind of electronic kind of community. But yeah, that's good. Just kind of figuring out multiple ways. All right. I know there's some other folks out there. How else have you done things? Are you starting to think about your next steps?
Hi, Brenda Barnes Jameson. I'm an intentional interim pastor in Chicago area, UCC. And I can use some help with some hacks. I started in a whole bunch of things. I'm pretty good at helping churches with intentional transformation processes, revitalization processes. And I've discovered in my previous church that I'm pretty good at helping people begin to use Zoom in various kinds of ways. What I'm discovering with this church is doing them both together immediately is becoming much, much more challenging. I think this is an ideal time for the church to be thinking about who they are and who they're becoming. But right now I have half my church who really can't wait to be back in person, is clamoring for that and refuses to do anything online. And the other half who is clamoring for online and resistant to working in person. And I am really feeling challenged around all of that. I've been with the church since just before Advent. So we've just barely had a running start, and now it looks like it's possible for us to meet back in person again in another month or so. And I'm overwhelmed.
I'm sorry to hear that, Brent. The one thing I've learned over the last couple of months is we are not going to manage our way out of pandemic. Like and I think that all of us, especially if you're an interim, my mom is an interim, and I've been an interim, and we have this plan, right? We're supposed to help them get to a certain point so that their next person can come and all those kind of things. And we just can't do it. I mean, I've been likening this whole time as this low-grade fever that we all have. And it's brought on by reckoning in our country, politics, pandemic, and we can't do everything. I mean, and so I think there is, like, I say that a lot to the communities that I serve, and then I go ahead and make sure that everything gets done. I mean, that's generally been my MO over my entire ministry. But the last 3-4 months, things have just not happened. And I've had to let myself and the community be okay with that, right? And it is a source of privilege, right, to be able to think that we can just manage our way through it, that the things aren't just right in our faces. but as COVID has squeezed our community, my own life, and well as some of our other folks, it's become much more clear that yes, we would love to have redone our mission statement and mission study by this time. That was the main reason they called me here, was to do that. And they're like, we haven't been able to do that. And some people catch themselves shifting back into, well, when are we going to start? And I'm like, we can't do all these things. So if there's anything, I would just, I think most of us, we do talk about letting things fail and then we don't let them fail. At least that's what I do. I won't say most of us, but is that just some things are not going to be able to happen. I mean, I think that's, and we've always excluded people. I think churches have always done things where people can't show up. And this, I don't want this to sound harsh, but I think we've bent over backwards to make sure that the people who are already in our community stay connected. And my greatest fear, and I don't even know it's a fear, is that we're going to forget that we're also supposed to reach out to new people and new communities. And so can people make that transition to see, we've really wanted to stick together, which was great, but that energy has to shift. And some of our folks are going to have to realize that the church isn't for them in the same way that I think they would always want it to be. I have 0 hacks for you, Brenda, because but I don't know. There's other words from people who are in similar situations or things that you've maybe tactical pieces that you've been able to do that might be helpful for Brenda.
I have nothing practical or helpful, but I want to say, Brenda, thank you. You just described my reality, and I just arrived here January 1. So my name is Laura Crow, and I am serving a United Methodist congregation just outside of Madison, Wisconsin. So, great. And these people, literally have pressed the pause button back in February. I would say 60% of the committees have not met in virtually or in person since the pandemic started. And I have, had my hands full just gathering people back together to say, who are you and what do you do? But they really just want to be in person and go back to the way it has always been. But there is another, small group of people that really want change and really want to move forward and are really embracing the technology. But we're at poles, and it's really hard.
Yeah. Thank you for voicing that, Laura and Brenda. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of that going on. So appreciate it. All right, others. All right. So, go ahead, Judy. Go for it.
If I may, I've already spoken, but yep, I mentioned that our church is kind of looking at the long term about viability. So having done this for a while, one of the things that we've talked about in a recent meeting is how it might look to, instead of merging or nesting in another church, to stay virtual 3 weeks out of the month and rent space on an occasional basis. Might allow the community, because this community is very active in mission activities. They're very engaged in that, but the building has gotten to be a real problem as far as budget is concerned. So
yeah,
that
great.
Might
That's
allow
the church where my mother is the interim. So my mom served for a while and then retired, and then is one of those that then went right back to work, which I don't really understand, but so it's now an interim, but that's what they're doing. And they're doing that because it's an African congregation. So it draws from a huge geographic region. And so what they've discovered is they just want to gather at least once. So what their plan is they're going to gather in person once a month and then do Zoom the other 3-4 weeks. Like they've already made that decision that come the fall, they're getting a much higher attendance and more consistent attendance with Zoom, but they still miss the in-person. So they're doing exactly what you're thinking, Judy, is they're going to meet once a month in person for communion and whatever this is months down from now. And then all the other times they're just going to meet online, and that could be a viable model for them going forward. So thank you for that.
Yeah, we've been doing a drive-through communion once a month, which has given us at least the appearance of seeing each other, even though it's not really close. It's totally distanced, but it has met a need.
Yeah,
for sure.
Awesome. All right, I think we have time for one more. And questions or thoughts or comments about what you're doing? All right. Going. I see folks leaning. No? All right. Oh, Dawn, go for it.
Would you give us in the chat room where those of us who are kind of new can get the basics of doing the Zoom that you have been doing? If you can direct us to that, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So the easiest thing to do is, are you a Facebooker, Don?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if you go to the Zoom Faith one, if you haven't joined that yet, wild upon wild stuff. I mean, we started that in March, and there's 2,700 people now are part of this group. And we're hearing about it from random places around the world. They're like, oh, the Zoom Faith group. I'm like, okay. But that's really the place to find out everything from the minutia. Like, we have a couple people that always post when the new updates are coming out. And so you know what's coming up in the new updates. Like, I think it's awesome. We have super nerdy, in the weeds, minutia, and then those of us that are like all up in the head and like thinking theory and all that. So that's the place. It's called Zoom Faith. If you just type in Zoom Faith in Facebook, that'll get you to the group. And that's where I'll share most of my things as well. And we are thinking, trying to begin to break that group down into a little bit more bite-sized pieces. And so just as I posted a note last week, you need to think about ways to have that group be more helpful for people. But and we'll do this once a month, continue on as we kind of go. So I appreciate you all hanging in there for this. And for those of you that are brand new to this group, welcome. And those of you that get to see again your faces, welcome back. So I think that's it for today. I'll post this up on the YouTube channel and then post that in the Zoom Faith group later this week. All right, all. Again, thank you for being here, and we'll see you. I believe it's actually the 1st of March, a month from now. So, all right, take care, all. Bye.